Hello everyone, my name is Sean, and in this story that I'm about to tell you, well, let me just say that it is far beyond anything you could possibly begin to imagine. This, in particular, is due to the clown sightings in North Carolina. Do we have anyone that knows of someone or who lives in North Carolina themselves? If so, then you will know what I'm talking about. Seeing clowns everywhere you go. There haven't been any clowns killing people just yet, or as far as we know. I understand the terrifying truth behind these clowns. I'll never forget that night when I was the patrolling officer on the streets, way before I became a detective. Continuing on with the story at hand here, I was just a rookie. I was doing my routine round. Hate to say it, but it was the graveyard shift, and the streets were vacant, as dead as a ghost town. Thinking back to that night just really gives me the chills. As I was getting into my patrol car and getting ready to leave, that's when I heard a loud squeak. The squeaking noise sounded like a toy, but boy was I wrong. I found out where the source of the noise was coming from. It was coming from the edge of the woods, and just like any officer would, I went to investigate. As I got to the edge of the woods, the squeaking noise got louder, and I heard a little bit of laughter as well. This was not ordinary laughter. It sounded distorted and demonic. With fear residing inside of me, I knew it was part of my job to push past it and continue on. I had to be brave. So I drove down deeper into the woods, and that's when I started to see a light, then movement. At first, I thought it was a bunch of kids partying and having a good time, but that was not the case. Soon after, I heard a woman screaming bloody murder, and that's when I knew I had to get closer to see what the hell was happening, but when I did, I saw them. These people dressed as clowns, almost like a cult type thing, some bizarre ritual. Something seemed to be a little bit off, more than it just being a cult though. The clown people seemed more animalistic than human. I was about to break it up, but something in my body would not allow me to, for I was frozen solid with fear. I was petrified. Something in the back of my mind was telling me to run and get the hell out of there, but like I said, my legs would not budge from the spot that I was standing in. That's when I heard the woman scream again. She was begging for her life, praying for God to help her, but no one ever came to her aid. Not even me. What could I even do? I was so petrified, and what I saw next almost made my blood run cold. They placed the woman on a podium, which almost looked like a child's birthday party table. They stripped her naked in a ritualistic manner, and then they placed a rubber nose in her mouth to keep her from screaming. As she lay restrained there, struggling to get free, I saw the look of sheer terror plastered across her face. Helpless for what to do, I could only tremble with fear as well. Remember when I first told you that the clowns did not look human? I was about to find out just how right I was. They were not human at all. These things, these demons, whatever you want to call these things, they dressed up as the one thing that few people are afraid of, and that had to be clowns. But to make things worse, their figures began to transform. Some of them started to grow horns and sharp, jagged teeth. Some started to grow twisted wings on their backs, and some of their eyes were red as blood. After their transformations, they were far more terrifying than they were as clowns. After seeing this, I almost passed out. I was immediately brought back to reality by the woman's terrified screams, and when I went back to look, well, I really wished that I hadn't. At that very moment, that's when they began feeding on her. While she was still alive, they tore into her flesh with those horrifying teeth of theirs, and all she could do was scream with terror. Those agonizing screams haunt me. Blood was everywhere. Her intestines and organs were sprawled out on her feet. While those things were still feeding on her, I began to gag on reflex at the sight before me. I just didn't know how much more I could take of this. Sounds of them chewing on her flesh was a nightmare that I wished wasn't a reality. I just didn't know what to do. That's when my body finally gave out on me, and then my surroundings faded to black. When I finally came to, I was back in my patrol car, drenched in a cold sweat. I was trying to contemplate on what I saw. I had hoped it was just a nightmare. That's when I saw it in the back seat of my car. A fake rug with some grease paint and a note. When I reached for the note and slowly opened it, all the color had gone from my face. When I read its contents, it said,
"Hello, officer. I really hope you enjoyed the show we performed last night. We will be seeing you next year. Signed with love, the Clowns."
The story I'm about to tell you is true, but this particular story is one you will never find in history books or online for that matter. A story that was passed down through generations of Native American ancestry. The natives don't really speak about it, but you may hear it under hushed murmurs or whispers. A dark stain on history that we wish not to repeat. It's a mask, but not just any mask. It's called the Devil's Mask. This particular mask is cursed, and whoever possesses it either winds up hurt or worse. You're probably wondering, how did a mask made of evil come to be? I'll tell you exactly, word for word, something that my people have kept to themselves for far too long, but chose not to discuss it, as I've mentioned. There was an old shaman in the tribe who healed the sick and occasionally brought back the dead. But behind the shaman's kindness was something evil, something too dark to describe. But if I had to put it in easy words, I would have to say that his heart was deeply corrupted by the devil himself. The reason why I say this is because, under his people, he would perform terrible rituals by using his own people, and sometimes even outsiders. The type of rituals he would perform were horrifying, to say the least. If his victims were male, he would castrate them and use their genitalia as an ingredient for a potion. If they were lucky, he would knock them out so they wouldn't feel the excruciating pain of their own testicles being severed from their bodies. If it was a woman, he would violate them horribly, and after he would mutilate their uterus. If they were with child, he would forcibly remove the fetus and use it in his spells. Sometimes, he would sacrifice the fetus to his dark master and, if not those two things, he would simply eat it straight from the woman's womb, and he would laugh while eating the unborn child. It just kept getting worse through time. Sometimes he would castrate them or mutilate them, or he would remove vital organs. Sometimes he would remove the heart or lung so he would appease his lord Satan. Until one day he was found out by a passing young brave who walked towards his tent and heard the gurgling screams coming from it. They were faint but loud enough if you had gotten close to there. The young warrior walked in and discovered the ghastly sight.
"I started to run to the village elder,"
he said. When this came to light to the village elder, he had his best warriors catch the shaman and bring him back so he could be judged by his own village. When the shaman was caught, the elder sentenced him to death by beheading. As the shaman awaited death, his village offered him one last request. The shaman requested to wear his mask that he made from the flesh and bones of his victims in the shape of the devil's face. As he put it on, he spoke these words.
"Killing me will not make your suffering go away. It will only make it worse, for I have the power of my god Satan, and as long as I believe in his word, I shall live on for eternity." So I laid his head down on a stump, and, with one swift swing of an axe, he was dead,
said the village elder. After he was executed, he was burned along with his mask, but with one problem. The mask did not burn, no matter how hot they'd gotten the flames. It just would not turn to ashes like its owner. So the village elder took the mask and locked it away, to never see daylight, but that day would end when one of the chief's grandsons got their hands on it and put it on. Not even a day later, he contracted an illness and died. It did not end with the little boy. Things just got worse as long as the mask remained in that village. Women started to have miscarriages. Men suffered from heart attacks and blood loss automatically. Even the other children were not safe. They all contracted the same illness the little boy did a day earlier, and they all died. The village was almost completely wiped out at this point due to that damn mask. If it wasn't some mysterious illness, it was due to invaders who would come and kill their best of warriors and rape their women, killing them afterwards, and, for the lucky few who did survive, they were enslaved. All because of that fucking mask. Something had to be done, the elder thought. So he gathered up what was left of the warriors that weren't killed during the invasion and weren't taken by the invaders. He had them take that mask as far away from the village as they could. So they did. They took it to a secluded area where no one could disturb it or remove it from its hiding spot. So they got to work and dug a hole so deep into the earth that even God himself would have a hard time getting to it. They buried it. Since they were far from home, they decided to set up camp at least a mile from the hiding spot until morning, and that's when they would head back and be rid of the curse for good. Their celebration was cut short, though. For the next morning, when they went back to make sure the mask was still buried, they found an empty hole and the mask was nowhere to be found. That's where the story ends. I'm afraid that to this day, no one knows where that mask is. They don't even care where it is, as long as it never comes back. That meant that everything would be normal again for my ancestors, or so I thought. Until one day I was in town getting groceries and I passed an old antique shop. Right there in the window stood a sign that said, "Authentic Native American Mask for Sale," and next to the sign was a blood-stained mask with a horrible face and horns protruding from its forehead, and that's when my blood turned as cold as ice. I thought to myself that couldn't be it. That could not be the same mask from the stories. As I looked at it through the shop window, I could have sworn that it was looking right back at me, staring straight into my soul, knowing my fears and thoughts. After standing there for what felt like an eternity, I got the hell out of there and drove home. Before I got to my house, I picked up my cell phone and called my great-great-grandfather, who was a chief on the reservation. I told him that it had come back, and my great-great-grandfather asked me what I meant. I told him that the mask, the one from the fucking stories, had found its way home. My great-great-grandfather stood quiet for a minute on the phone. That's when he began to speak.
"Where is it, grandson? Tell me,"
he replied with fear in his voice. I told him it was in an antique shop in town. Then he spoke again and told me,
"Whatever you are doing, do it and come by to pick me up. We're going back to that place to end this curse once and for all."
So I turned around and went by his place on the reservation and picked him up and took him straight into town to the antique shop. About the time we got there, an accident had occurred. A fire had broken out at the restaurant next door to the shop and had spread to it. Before the fire was extinguished, everything on that entire strip was turned to ashes. I came to find out there were people still inside that had perished in the fire along with everything else. The firemen scouted around for what was left of the people and items. Not a damn thing survived. The mask was gone, and I know what you're thinking. What if it went up in flames just like everyone and everything else? But I know for sure as fuck it didn't burn. And now it's still out there, waiting to come back, waiting to finish the rest of us off, just like the shaman promised. So if anyone out there sees a Native American devil's mask drenched in blood, get as far away as you possibly can, or you will become its next victim. There is a curse that plagues this town, like an epidemic that holds no cure. This curse comes in the form of a little girl. No one knows where this little girl came from, and whoever sees her will either die or disappear without a trace. However, there are those who are lucky enough to have seen this curse but only seen the mask it wears and never its true face. That's probably why people either wind up dead or disappear off the face of the earth, because they saw what she looks like. Some people have said that she wore a white dress stained with blood and had black dress shoes on. Others say her dress was pink and that she carried a stuffed toy which was covered in human flesh and marble painted with the blood of her victims. Me? Well, I have seen her up close and personal. Why I'm still alive is yet to be determined, but I know why people have seen her face. It's because when confronted with this curse, it appears that she doesn't have a face, or so it seems. Here's what happened a few years ago. I was babysitting for a friend, watching her children because she had a date and she couldn't find a babysitter. At the last moment, and since I lived just next door, I was the closest thing she could find. So while she was out, I fed her children and got them off to bed. When they were upstairs asleep calmly and safely, I figured I would sit down on the couch and watch a little television until my friend got back. When I was in the middle of watching my program, I nodded off to sleep, until I was startled out of my sleep by a loud thumping sound coming from upstairs. Hearing this made me very alert and afraid. But when I finally realized that it was coming from upstairs, I assumed that it must have been one of her children getting up to go to the bathroom. I thought nothing of it and went back to watching my program, until I heard the thump again. Concerned and curious, I went upstairs to go check on the children. When I made my way up the stairs, I saw a shadow out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was one of the children, but the shadow appeared to be too small to be one of my friend's children. So I called out to the little shadow and asked, "Hello? Is anyone there?" All I received in return was a girlish giggling. It was eerie and sounded like it came from a very young child. It was playful and mysterious, but also seemed somewhat forced. It's hard to explain, but if I were to use one way to describe the giggles, it was if it held no emotion. It was cold. Have you ever heard a child laugh so mechanically? I hadn't until that moment. I continued cautiously up the stairs. The shadow was gone, and all that remained was a pitch-black darkness. I reached for the light in the hall and headed towards the children's bedroom. I went to the oldest child to check on him and see if everything was all right, and as I walked into the room, I realized he was sound asleep in his bed. I was concerned, though, because I didn't hear any breathing or snoring or any type of sleeping noises at all. I found this kind of odd. Even the quietest of sleepers at least made some type of sound. Thinking this, I went closer to the bed and began to lightly shake him while I asked if he was okay. Still, no movement. So I pulled back the covers, and to my horror, I discovered that the poor child was brutally gutted like a pig, with his intestines and organs strewn out of him. The only thing that was apparent to me at this time was the look of sheer terror on his face before he died, the expression he took to his death. It was such a mangled, deformed look which was staring back at me, cold and agonizing. At this point, I didn't know whether to scream or puke. I tried desperately to choke back a scream. That's when I realized that I needed to check on the youngest brother, so, without a second thought, I ran to the young boy's room to check on him. I silently prayed that he was still alive, but, to my surprise, he was gone. I called out his name, but there was no response. As I ran downstairs and continued to yell for him, I heard his voice laughing along with that little girl giggle behind it, and I heard him talking to someone. He said, "Are you sure this will be a fun game to play? I don't know. My mommy told me to never go off with strange people." That's when I heard the giggle again, followed by a little girl's voice that was so soft it was almost a whisper. She responded,
"It's okay. It will be a fun game. I promise we will have lots of fun together. Just like I had fun playing with your older brother, but he didn't want to play as much. But that's all right. I took care of him, and as long as you play with me, I won't have to do away with you like I did your brother."
So I ran to where the voices were coming from, and that's when I saw her. She was wearing a white dress that was covered in blood, and holding a stuffed animal that looked oddly like a giraffe, which was covered in blood. I yelled out to them to stop where they were, and the little girl turned around to face me. I was shocked to realize that she didn't have a face. She had all the features of a little girl, but no fucking face. I began to charge towards her, trying to grab my friend's son, but with no prevail. The little girl stopped me. I don't know how she did it, but once I got close to her, it felt like I hit an invisible wall. On impact, I was launched backwards, thrown against a wall, and as I laid there, it seemed as if minutes had passed before I began to gain consciousness. Defeated, I watched on as they headed out the door, holding hands together. They were laughing and giggling. I tried to stop them again, but she was just too strong for me to handle. How could a little girl be this damn strong? Even though she had managed to stop me each and every time, I still tried one last time. This was when she turned around again and started to giggle once more. To my annoyance, she said,
"Don't try to stop me, or you will wind up like everyone else that I played with. Just another body in the morgue. So, if you know what's good for you, you leave me alone and let me have my fun."
I yelled out, "Why the fuck are you doing this? Why?" She replied to my question,
"Because it's fun, silly. Killing people is so fun. It gives me a pleasure and nothing can compare to it. Just the feeling of blood splash all over my face and the warm, slimy feel of intestines and organs jiggling in my hands. Just like how I imagine Christmas is. So, back off. The only reason why I'm sparing you is that my new friend asked me to. So if you know what's good for you, you don't stop me. Ever."
Then she released a giggle, like a laugh, then turned around and grabbed hold of my friend's son by his hand and began walking away into the darkness. I watched on, helpless, and an overwhelming feeling of dread and worry flooded me, but more so, fear. My gut turned as their silhouettes became one with the darkness of the chilly evening night. Not knowing what else to do, I ran back into the house and immediately called the police. Then, I called my friend and told her the whole story of what happened. The police came. They questioned me, and though I pleaded and begged for them to look for this little girl, I became a suspect. I tried to tell them all that I knew and tried to tell them everything that had happened, but they didn't believe me. They just chalked it up to a robbery gone wrong and a kidnapping. When my friend got back home, she blamed me for this as she cried. She watched her oldest son be carried off in a body bag. I can only imagine what she's going through right now, especially if I had children and this happened to me. I would be completely upset and pissed off beyond belief, but her sadness didn't last long. I'm afraid a month or two after her son's funeral, she stopped looking for her youngest. She went into a deep depression. It was so deep, there was no return. She even stopped talking to me until one day, a delivery man started to smell something coming from her house. He explained it as the smell of death. When the cops came to bust down her door, they found her laying there, dead in the living room. Her wrists were sliced open, and pills were scattered all over the floor. She had committed suicide. I guess the thought of losing her children was too much for her, and she couldn't take it anymore. As for me, I dedicated my life to hunting down this demon-like child. I traveled from town to town after each clue that is left, especially when a child goes missing, is found dead, or someone else like a parent is found dead. I just know that it's her, claiming another victim. Every once in a while, I'll get closer to finding her. How's that, you may ask? Well, it's simple. I always follow the giggling, and that always gets me closer to finding the creature I have now called the faceless Lolly.